The Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Third Book. Quest for Uncle Kurt. Chapter 10. At 14:30 hours, I was again on the road, surrounding the stream de las Conchas, and disposed to undertake the second part of the journey to Santa Maria. The ground was loose, because it seemed that it didn't rain since long time ago, and the wind was enough strong as to make this course be slow for the rest. 2 hours later, I had just traveled 70 kilometers, and I was preparing to cross through the midst of the Colorado del Valle. The path continued through the main road. This settlement is located in the province of Tucumán, in the middle of the path that traversed the geographic wedge that a bad layout of limits ligated to the actual map. It has some 20 squares long, and 4 or 6 of weight. While I was crossing it, I observed the same syndrome that is manifested in thousand settlements and hamlets of the Argentinian north, the decadence. The poverty is an endemic ill in these, paradoxically, rich provinces, forgotten by the bureaucratic centralism of the megacity Buenos Aires, and for the sloth or impotence of the local governments, who have usually their hands tied by existent feudalism beyond the official speeches. The poverty is an ill that hurts. But, is worse to see the decadence. This is, to contemplate what was a splendid example yesterday transformed in a censurable vision. While the car was tolling through the dirt road, I was looking at the houses of Spanish colonial style, that today are shadows of what they were in past years of splendor. Cruel caricatures of the hope and faith of their constructors. Who edified these houses, I thought contrite, believed in Argentina, they had faith in America. The inexorable collapse of these is the overwhelming response to these illusions. It was seen that this settlement, as many others, evolved up to a height that must be situated in 50 or more years before, and then came a period of decadence during which none wall was lifted, neither a brick was put. Windows closed for years, when the wood framework rotted, chipped and leprous walls, gnawed fronts by the thousand enclencies of the time and soul. The decadence of an urban community, of its architecture, is a retrogression that is indefectibly implanted in the soul of the dwellers. And there were they, looking at me passing with that absent air, with that contemplative indifference so characteristic of the indigenous America. Because, in they the decadence was seen starkly. In those children, who spied me from behind in a corner. In those obscure and slanted eyes that were looking at me guileless when they offered me a corn tortilla, but they turned back distrustful at any question. What difference presented the settlement, these houses, these children, with their equivalent of other parts of America, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia? None. In this answer, was also that decadence, in which, paying the high price to isolate us from Latin America, 100 years of European culture, have not left nor a trace in these creoles, forgotten by everyone. We've not gave them anything different to what they have received in the mentioned countries. They are neither more nor less civilized than they who, even though the belief in the opposite that sustains the European oligarchy, that rules this country since 100 years ago. For this reason, an explanation for the general decadence that desolates the settlements of American blood, can be this one. In 500 years the European culture didn't flourish in the soul of the American because neither those who implanted with blood and fire, nor those who taught it blissfully, really believed on it. The millenary culture of the American races was replaced, energized by great myths, by the European materialistic culture, lacking of spirituality and transcendence. And the religion of America, that conserved the remembrance of the white gods, was forbidden, in favor of the rationalist doctrine of Catholicism. Thenceforth, the natives would have to glorify the biblical history of the chosen people, worship a crucified Hebrew God, from whom they had never heard before, and they would remain out from the theological discussion, because the new religion reached already finished, complete on its philosophical foundations. If there, in the unknown Nicaea, a council had decided that God was triple, what could say here the recently submitted pagans? And those who were here, did they know what meant the Catholic dogma? No. They killed and looted in the name of the Catholic dogma that nobody comprehended, nor anyone would care to explain. But the wealth would end. Finally, the time to create new wealth would reach, to produce cultural objects for those evangelized empires. And then, in that same moment, would begin the decadence. The church would thrive with the conquest of America, destroying systematically every vestige of the Atlantean origin of the great civilizations, every proof about the extraterrestrial nature of the spirit of men. And the Spaniard, out of control just as the great Mother Bina prophesied Quiblin, would sprout evenly the blooded semen over the native populations. From this holocaust of water would emerge the children of horror, the mestizo population of America, men as those who I saw passing through their decadent villages. Men culturally indifferent, who have decided to do nothing. If a gringo does not come, with faith in something, and raises the houses and settlements again, they won't do it. And all will fall to the ground, asunder. Puerile vengeance, but effective, as their cultures fell yesterday and as will fall tomorrow the soul of Occident, if it is insisted to continue divorcee from the blood of America. When I passed through Fuel Comeda, I could not avoid imagining that in such sight in Camp Diego of Rojas, 4 centuries ago, when he marched chasing Leto of Tharsis. He not achieved to localize the Pucara di Farsi, even if he remained in Taffy Del Vale for months. But, would I make it? I believed so, that the indications of BELICENA VILLCA were very precise, and I'd achieved to reach until the Chaca, and that I'd meet with the Indian Segundo, the offbeat descendant of the people of the moon. And the optimism didn't abandon me, when I arrived to Santa Maria. When I crossed the bridge over the river Santa Maria, I watched the clock, 7:30 inches the afternoon. I had delayed 5 hours from Kefut, and dusk was falling. Even for my impatience to reach, as soon as possible, to the house of Uncle Kurt, I had decided to wait the night, to comply with the promises that I made to my mother in regard to the prudency and security. I stopped the car in front of other house of regional articles to acquire the famous products of the zone. The cayenne, the Arab, concentrate grape, the raisins and the wine. After that I paid, I mused inquiring the vendor about the street frame emeritus squire. Thus, I knew that it goes from east to west, ending in the river Santa Maria, which is one of the peripheral limits of the city, and it goes from north to south. The number 95, I thought, must be nearby the river, perhaps, in the last square. Are you looking for someone in the street, Esquire? Maybe I can help you, surprised me the salesman with his question. Oh, the small town curiosity. But I did not let me impress. Yes, I'm looking for a Poco saleswoman, I lied. In Saltac gave me the approximate address, because they didn't remember with exactitude. A poncho saleswoman, in the street, Esquire? No, unfortunately I do not know any poncho saleswoman who lives in the street, Esquire, but tell me, what type of ponchos are you searching? I have a nice selection. And at good price. A moment later, I went out with my original purchase, and with a poncho of Catamaca, with Inca guard. I chose to have dinner at a second-class restaurant, but, according to what vendor of regional products said, prepared the best rabbit stew of the Valley cattle. Once I positioned myself in a secluded table, I realized about the right election, because this was a place very visited by salesmen and travelers of commerce in which to once surprise the presence of a stranger. I was savoring the dessert, sweet cherry with nuts, when a child in rags offered me to shine my boots. There's an age, I thought with dejection, the childhood, in which all the animals of the nature employ to play and romp, protected by their fathers, and other adult members of the population. The human being instead, can't guarantee to their children the enjoyment of the most beautiful age as it must be lived, enjoying of the fantasy. By principle, I hate that children work with profit purposes, and my first impulse was to take away such bootblack. But an idea had occurred to me in that instant, and I extended the right feet in mute acceptation. Was a child of some 7 years old, and doubtless Indian ascendancy. He started cleaning and covering with ointment the boots, to then, by means of vigorous massages with a canvas band, try to obtain the desired brightness. "What is your name?" I asked, seeking to gain his trust. "Antonio Wang, sir," he replied rapidly. "Tell me, Antonio, do you live far from here?" He lifted his long-bent head, and looked at me with an interrogative gesture in the eyes. Finally, he shrugged his shoulders and, signalizing an indefinite place, said, "Very far, sir, over there, on the other side of the river." I decided that my question had been unfortunate. I should try again, but this time I'd be more direct. "Do you know the street Esquire?" "Yes, sir. Is at the end of the city. If you go straight by this one," he signalized the street of the restaurant, "you'll find it at the end of the pavement. Just when the pavement ends is the street Esquire." "Yes, sir." He was talking without stop polishing, and at this rate he would end soon. I bent down a little to talk without raised the voice and said him, "I'm going to see Sereno Sanguedels. Do you know him?" He laughed. "The confectioner? Who don't know Don Sereno, sir?" He stretched his head, and said in tone of confidence, "You don't tell him, but my brothers and me always try to steal him candy bottles." Drew the lad, "There's no one who do them richer in Santa Maria." Hi, hi, hi. Laughed like a sparrow, and he was finally celebrating his mischief, a child. Uncle Curtis confectioner. I thought, delighted. I seemed to me that it'd be fool for not seen it before, but that idea had no sense, and I dismissed it. The child had finished his work, and I disposed of the information enough to localize Uncle Kurt. I paid him generously, and he went away to offer his services to other tables. A wall clock, hanging beneath a little picture with a collection of arrowheads, showed the 21 hours. I paid the dinner and left. The night was fresh, but the sky was covered with clouds, and there was not a blow of wind. I removed the car and I left, following the instructions of the bootblack. As I approached to the street Esquire, the houses were more and more spread, and they decreased in quality, where not only the pavement ended, but also the lights of the streets were almost non-existent. I turned through the street Esquire, towards the instinct indicated me where the river should be, and I searched in vain for a sign, a point of reference that would have allowed me to reckon the numeration. Cursing inside the idea to visit in the night to Uncle Kurt, I comprehended rapidly that I circulated through a neighbor formed by small farms of 4 or 5 hectares each one. In the northeast of Argentina all the farms are baked to a same pattern of construction, a rectangle of land properly wired, and a whole house of the owner or guard, edified at a short distance from the entrance of the palisade. Can exist variations or aggregations, but this is the general type that I knew well, because our own ranch in Cerrillos is adapted the same scheme. I knew then about the utility to call from the entrance, due to the house is usually far from it, and I accepted unconsciously the fact that I was going to intern myself in one of the properties to advise my arrival. The car hit some 5 minutes through the somber street of Esquire, that now gave the unequivocal sensation of a steep slope. The river should have been near, but, even if the powerful high light of 4 quarts perforated the darkness, I didn't achieve to distinguish nothing else, beyond 20 meters. I stopped the car, and put the handbrake. It was better to realize an exploration walking. I took from the glove compartment a lantern pen type, which exiguous light is useful sometimes, and I descended, taking the precaution to close the car for the case in which I'd have to move away from there. 1 moment later, I realized the opportune of the decision to stop the car, because, 50 meters ahead, the street turns narrow abruptly, and it fell in a pronounced ravine over the river Santa Maria, which ran down, at a distance of 150 meters. If I would have continued advancing with the car, I'd have been in difficulties to turn and move back. I was, finally, in the origin of the street of Squy, not so far from the dwelling of Uncle Kurt. This presumption gave me new animus to try to orient myself. Something that, I was seeing, was very difficult. The street of Squy had lost its sidewalks many squares behind, and, where I was now, was just an alley of gross gravel which was extended from one to another wiring, each limits of unknown properties. Towards the east was the river, so, if this was the last square, presumed home of Uncle Kurt, the searched address had to be in one of the both sides of the street, a few steps from there. I explored the side of the north, which was composed by a file of 3 wire strands, up to height of 50 meters, but, surrounded on its entire extension by shrubberies of bushy privets, and perfectly pruned in form of pillar. I walked some 150 meters without finding any door, or palisade, so I deduced that it was at the end of a property. Trying to calm the contrariness that I felt for such an unusual situation, I crossed through the southern side, and I restarted the quest. This property was better limited, due to, I discovered soon, a thick mesh with rhombus wires, that permitted to glimpse the tangle of the well-known privet. The night was turning impenetrable, reducing the help of the small lantern, and for this reason, my pace was awkward and hesitant, while I revised inch by inch, the tender stretch of the street of Squy. When I was already despairing to find an entrance in that wall, occurred a miracle. An enormous pipe gate and mesh emerged from the shadows almost at the end of the street, at some 10 meters from the ravine. I oriented the halo of the lantern inwards, but, just as I supposed, I didn't see any construction, but a path, formed by 2 parallel traces, that was lost in the obscurity. At the left was appreciated a well-maintained plantation of vines, small, and filed with racemes. At the right boundless seedlings of stocked orchard. I returned, to check the door, but, I didn't find the doorbell nor any caller. Instead, I discovered 2 steel rings, one in the door, and other in a concrete frame, secured by a heavy iron padlock. Discouraged, I leaned against the gate, trying to take a determination. The most reasonable would be to leave and come back in the day, but the supposition that would be laborers, or even familiars of Uncle Kurt, retained me, to whom my presence would result, very strange. It was only missing to persist in the nocturnal quest, entering in the property in despite of the padlock. Only if that would be really the dwelling of my uncle. I remained indecisive, embraced to the mesh at the gate, sharpening the gaze towards the path of the entrance, when it seemed to pass swiftly alight. It was just for a second, but enough to relive the hope in some result that night. I imagined that the hall should be quite far, thereby no light reached to the gate, intercepted, perhaps, by trees or obstacles. I didn't think more, and I climbed up through the contiguous mesh at the gate. Except for the contretemps that a piece of my jacket, safari, remained in the barbed wires, which crowned the trestle of the mesh, I entered without problems. Some seconds later, I moved calmly through the interior path, following with the lantern the marked trails of vehicles that, the same displayed. I had walked some 100 meters, when the path turned abruptly to the right, and within a group of leafy trees. When I took this bend, I spotted at some 30 or 40 meters, a house albino type, of 2 floors, with roof and half-round shingles, which color contrasted with the width walls and the black bars of windows and balconies. Against the obscurity of the night, it leaned ghostly without, apparently, any lights on. This vision, and the silence only broken by the buzz of cicadas, contributed to demoralize me. I stopped for a while, and contemplated the immense mass of the house, shielded by the branches of some giant willows, that were hammocked, to the beat of a gentle breeze. I had inexplicable desires to run and abandon such unreal scenery, but I recovered immediately, and advanced at huge steps with intention to call to the door to request the presence of Uncle Kurt, or Sereno Sanguidos. Was then, when I heard. I was at a few meters from the house, when I felt coming from behind, towards the right, a known sound. It was a penetrating whimper. A very special lament that only who have experience in the dog breeding can recognize. Because that whimper is the expression of the attack desire that the dog manifests when the master asks him to do it. I remembered that Mom had brought a small cat to the ranch, and to avoid that Canuto attack him, she decided to make him smell the cat, while she reprimanded the dog with strong screams and prohibited to touch him. Then Canuto was trembling, struggling between the instinct to kill and the obedience that he owed to his mistress, and released misleading whimpers that no express his pain, but the contained desire to attack. This type of whimper was the one that had sounded behind my back. Dogs. I thought alarmed, how did I not notice the dogs? God, how stupid. All the ranches have dogs. But why did they not bark? I turned back slowly. What I saw induced me a sudden terror, paralyzing myself in the sight in which I was. 2 pairs of green eyes flashed in the penumbra at a few steps from me. Were eyes of animals, of dogs perhaps, but I think that the panic was produced when I took consciousness of 2 things. One, the abnormal size of the beasts, and the other, their also abnormal caution. Because it resulted unthinkable that I had transited a lot through the ranch without any bark of the animals, and that instead they were following me quietly, almost crawling, until they were so near to me that I could touch them with the tip of my shoes. One of the beasts whimpered again with the evident desire to jump over me. In the moment in which assaulted me the certainty that their master should be near, a whistle sounded of indubitable human origin. I didn't reach to turn back this time, because the beasts, when heard the whistle, acted as moved by a spring, and with a great jump they threw themselves over the prey. Even if I was almost paralyzed by the terror, the instinct of conservation, and many years of karate, made me put on guard. But only to check that such beasts had a particular training, due to, instead to give bites, and search the neck as the combat dogs do, these seemed to know exactly what to do. Each one of them attacked an arm and nailed their teeth. I felt the flesh lacerated, and I saw that the beasts were shutting their jaws backwards while I felt the bone of my left arm creak without intentions to release. The impact of the attack made me stumble, due to, both dogs seemed to weigh more than my 90 kilograms. 1 second later, I fell backwards while I felt the bone of my left arm in the mouth of the gigantesque dog. I thought, while I was falling, in many tactics to escape from the dogs. I would wallow, kick their testicles, bite, crack, sounded the strike in my skull, and everything went dark and